And when we're talking about soil health, one thing you don't want to hear is the word rot, especially as it relates to cornfields. I sat down with University of Nebraska plant pathologist Dr. Tamra Jackson-Ziems to discuss corn stalk rot. So what is it exactly, and what can you do if it's happened to you?
The biggest problem right now that I'm concerned about in some of our cornfields as we're winding down the season and getting ready for harvest is that we do have a high incidence of stalk rot disease out there now. And in some fields, I think this is going to be a very serious problem. And of course, what we mean by that is the loss of stalk integrity on the inside. We have a lot of fungi that infect the stalk, and this can happen throughout the season, and especially in those fields that may have been under stress earlier, which in Nebraska in 2018 was most of our fields, from either too much water, too little water, leaf diseases, or whatever. And so those plants are ones that will have cannibalized the stalk, basically hollowing it out, but it makes it weaker this time of year. And as we approach harvest, if we have high winds, we could definitely have some lodging, causing our producers some complications during harvest.
So any main parts of the state that this is impacting?
There's some a little bit everywhere. And so if I was a producer, what I would do is to go out and be sure and scout those fields that are at higher risk for things like that, or where you might have seen these types of problems before. Even from the outside of the field, you can see some early evidence, and perhaps some of the corn died earlier than the rest of the field or turned an off color very quickly. That can be early evidence of stalk rot disease.
And you've mentioned that, I was reading an article and you said that some of the symptoms of stalk rot can be misleading and make it difficult to diagnose. What are some specific things to look for?
Initially, they may notice some of the leaves turning color early. And even if adequate moisture is available, some of those plants will dry up quickly within days. And that may indicate that below ground you've got some root rot and lower stalk rot that you can't see until you dig those plants up and cut them open lengthwise with your knife. And then you can see down in that soil line and crown line where some of that evidence is of discoloration and rot. And it can happen anywhere along the stem and stalk. And you may even see a concentration of that at each of the nodes too. And it shuts off water movement up the plant, and that's what causes that rapid loss.
And there's also like a push and a pinch method too that kind of helps with diagnosing it too. Talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. That's probably the easiest way for a producer to really get an idea if they have a problem and what the likelihood is that this crop is going to stand until harvest. And so the easiest way is to do the push test, and so walking through a large part of the field, pushing on at least, I would say at least 100 different plants. And so we recommend just pushing it at arm's length to about a 30-degree angle from upright, letting that plant snap back upright or not. And if it bends over below the ear, and I would keep track of the number of those that bend over and calculate your percentage. And if you have more than about 10% of those plants bending over, then you're at higher risk for stalk rot, especially the closer we get to harvest, because it'll only get worse from here. And it might be worth harvesting the worst fields first, even at the expense of having to dry the grain a little bit. Many people will remember last year's high winds that we experienced in October. We lost a lot of corn last year, both ear droppage and stalk rot. We'd like to avoid that this year.
Anything else a farmer can do if they think they've been affected?
There's nothing else this year, unfortunately, except adjusting that harvest order. But the thing I would keep in mind is which fields you might be seeing this problem in year after year, and in particular, now it's a good idea to identify which stalk rot diseases are affecting you. Because in the past, a decade ago, we didn't have resistant varieties or hybrids for many of these diseases, but we do now. Many of our contemporary hybrids are more resistant, and if there are fields that you like to harvest a little later, or maybe they're further away from your home place, and you tend to put them toward the end, they need to stand longer and better. And so especially those, I would consider putting resistant hybrids in to avoid this.
Okay, so if a farmer has been infected with the stalk rot or the ear rot, anything else they can do in advance of planting for next season so they can just get rid of this problem, or do what they can to get rid of the problem?
I think in general we do everything we can already to minimize stress on the crop. And stress any time during the season, whether that is due to water or nutrient loss or anything, is something that can lead to stalk rot later on. And so we're doing most of that already, and so that one additional thing is selecting the hybrid. That can definitely help. Ear rot diseases are a little bit different scenario. Those are, and all of these things, we're all victims of the circumstances we have during the season and trying to combat that. Ear rot diseases are something else I'm worried about this season.
And yeah, you mentioned the ear rot and the stalk rot. Any other diseases we should look out for?
Those two right now would probably be our biggest concern this year as we wind down. And as we go into winter time, hybrid selection is probably one of the best and easiest and least expensive ways to manage diseases. And so if you're having more gray leaf spot or any other disease, I would certainly keep track of which fields are affected by those diseases and position resistant hybrids out there accordingly.